website replatforms are big ticket items for lots of businesses. So they have like considerable investment and lots of different stakeholders want lots of different things from them. I suppose, can you talk a little bit about how replatforms can mean different things to different people?
Yeah, replatforms mean a lot of different things to different businesses. We have people come to us when they're trying to replatform. It can mean a new design, a migration, a new domain, changes to content. What we need to do is make sure we understand what they're actually asking for, those replatforms, and work with them to make sure they understand the risks and what's going on there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We find often in like as a DX team that sometimes they start off as like a website migration from one position to another, and very quickly they turn into like a redesign project by stealth. So someone somewhere doesn't like a web page or doesn't like a blog. So the next thing you know, they're trying to edge that into the designs as well. And obviously that can bake in a lot of risk if people haven't considered their audience and haven't considered how Google might treat that content afterwards.
And what we have to be sure to do is make sure those businesses understand the risks. Often during a replatforming process, they might think that, oh, we'll just change these designs, we'll bring in this new content, but that carries a lot of inherent risk to any organic visibility and something that we need to make sure that they're aware of early on in the project.
Yeah, so there's numerous hazards, isn't there, I suppose, around things that can go wrong. I think one of the things we often see is like designed by democracy. So basically lots of different people taking the web designs and giving feedback. There's a lot of a lack of involvement from the actual customer. Ultimately, if you're redesigning a web page, the person who that web page is for is the customer. So you want to get their feedback rather than someone in the marketing department or someone in the sales department or somewhere in accounts department, because ultimately they're not the people who this is actually designed for. So trying to make sure you've got enough qualitative insight, trying to make sure that you've done some A/B testing to some of these bigger changes that you're thinking about is definitely crucial if you're going to launch a new website. What are the sort of pivotal risks involved in like something like a replatform?
As an SEO, anytime that you're changing a URL or a design or content, there are always risks to traffic. When you migrate one URL to another, it takes time for search engines to understand what those new URLs mean. It has to pass all those ranking signals over. And whilst that might seem fairly straightforward, actually Google and other search engines say that can take up to 4 months for that to be done. A really good example of where this is something that hasn't gone too well is woo.com. They rebranded from WooCommerce to woo.com, left it for a month, and they actually made the decision to revert back to woocommerce.com because that migration didn't work. So they went through a replatforming process, and part of that was changing the domain. But that change in domain caused so many issues that they actually reverted on it. So rather than sticking the course and going ahead with all the investment they made, they went back.
What could they have done to avoid that challenge?
So my favorite thing when it comes to any replatforming is to do it in stages. So rather than doing a massive thing like changing your design and moving to a new domain in one go, do it in stages. So the first thing would be, if you have a new design, put that on the same website. That way you're going to make sure that you can understand what changes happen when you implement that new design. Then if you have any new content, update that content into that new design. That means that, yet again, it's another way you can start to measure what those changes do. And then finally, if you're happy with that and you are going to a new domain, then do that as the very last thing. By chunking that up into those different stages, you're able to spot any massive performance decreases. And this is something on a lot of the migrations I've worked on. When that hasn't been done, that's when things go really wrong during a replatform process.
That's really interesting because from a DX perspective, again, like we would want to see things tested. So if someone's going to test a design, we'd want to test the design before it went live. We'd want to test the content before it went live and try to understand what the pitfalls are. So actually, I suppose that speaks kind of to like the idea of like testing things from both angles, from like a Google angle and from a person angle, to make sure you're getting the best possible approach for everyone. Spoke a little bit about the risks of SEO and sort of the risk of migrating from platform to platform. What would you say the approach here is at Impression?
So the first thing we need to do is get all of those people into a room. So that could be the client, their marketing team, and what we obviously have developers on as early as possible, because if they are making changes during replatform, we need to make sure that they're there and involved. Once we all sit down, we can work on a project plan, put timelines against it, work out what's changing. And the really critical part about having Impression Bowl at that point is that we can really give our own milestones and make sure we're involved at each step of the process. We frequently have clients that come to us and they've already gone through a migration process and we're coming in after that's happened. So we're almost coming in right at the end rather than being there at the start. So being there at the start is really important. And then alongside that, we want to get detailed documentation. So we actually have a checklist here at Impression that we'll work on as part of that start of that meeting. We'll share that with the client. They're either in-house or external dev resource. That'll be owned by Impression. That gives us a single source of truth to be able to work through that migration. So that'll cover any technical changes, making sure the site has a good experience. Is it fast? Content changes, making sure that's all covered off, that we're not going to be making change to content that don't need to happen. And then finally, we do have some UX considerations in there, which I'm sure you'd want to cover.
Yeah, of course. I think it's bringing the customer and the journey along for a ride. I think it's really important to have clear objectives. Like, you don't want to be moving through a project and then sort of changing the scope of it as you go. And I think it speaks volumes that lots of people come to you once they've already started, because actually they've kind of already got it wrong to begin with, and that's why a lot of the time they want that help. And actually it'd be so much more cheap, effective, and the right thing to do to pre-plan it and to test some of this stuff. In terms of the checklist, I suppose that a lot of that stuff is to do with making sure that they're getting the right level of insight. So every time you make a design decision, you make an assumption and you make a certain amount of risk. And if you haven't tested those assumptions beforehand, you bake more and more and more risk into your project. So actually it's about doing the right amount of homework and the right amount of research to answer all the questions, so that when you are making those design decisions, you've got research and data to back it up.
And I can't tell you how difficult it is that when you're picking a migration up after it's been done, they're asking you, we've seen a ranking decrease, can you fix this? Or from the replatforming, trying to go back in a project that's already happened, already been paid for, it's almost a fool's errand. It's almost impossible to do. You just have to make the best of it you can, but it is a very challenging approach.
Yeah, and also emotions are running high because these things we have like real commercial outputs. See this a lot in e-commerce where a website was changed at some point, and then a couple of weeks later they see a drop off in conversion rate or a drop off in average order value, but they don't know exactly, because they change so much all the time, they don't know exactly when that occurred. And that's a real problem, because it's like kind of like trying to unbake a cake. You've put your ingredients in, and now you've got this challenge where you've got to try and go backwards, and you've got to try and sort of dissect for back to the problem rather than like diagnose what could go wrong in the first place. And it's like sort of prevention is better than cure in that case.
A great example of that is actually Impression. We went from impression.co.uk through to impressiondigital.com and made some changes during that time. When that move was made, we did see a pretty huge decrease in traffic that lasted around 3 months. But as we have the knowledge and know migrations and replatforming take time, we stayed the course, and we're starting to reap the benefits now, and we're starting to see that increase in visibility again. But wherever business maybe didn't have that involvement from an agency at that point, they'd probably be pretty concerned if after a month and they've had a huge investment in a website, they're not seeing any increases.
Oh yeah, that happens all the time. I always sometimes think that people think when they put the website live, they're going to see this sudden takeoff in all the key metrics. Actually, these changes sometimes do take a while to bed in. If you've got a lot of returning users on your website who are very stuck in their ways of how they use it, and you make a change to that website, sometimes even something that is net positive in the future can initially have a hiccup. So it's that analysis and making sure you run the experiments and getting the data.